Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into one of the most shocking developments in the ongoing geopolitical crisis, Belarus turning against Russia. This unexpected move has sent shockwaves through Moscow, Kiev, and across Europe, completely altering the dynamics of the Ukraine war and possibly reshaping the entire balance of power in Eastern Europe. For years, Belarus has been seen as one of Russia's most loyal allies, a partner state that stood shoulder to shoulder with the Kremlin through every international crisis. But now, cracks in that alliance are beginning to show, and the consequences could be enormous. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning of the war in Ukraine. When Russia invaded in February 2022, Belarus immediately opened its territory for Russian forces to stage attacks against Kiev. Missiles were launched from Belarusian soil, and Russian troops used Belarus as a safe logistical base. Alexander Lukashenko, the longtime leader of Belarus, publicly declared his full support for Vladimir Putin's so-called special military operation. Many believed that Belarus would even send its own troops into Ukraine to assist the Russians. But that never happened, and now we're beginning to understand why. Despite Lukashenko's close ties to Moscow, the Belarusian people never supported the war. Since the early days of the conflict, there have been protests, underground movements, and strong opposition among the public and within parts of the military. Many Belarusians see Ukraine as a brother nation, not an enemy, and they did not want their soldiers fighting and dying for Putin's ambitions. Over time, this quiet resistance has grown stronger, and reports are now emerging that elements within the Belarusian army are refusing orders related to Russian cooperation. Recent intelligence leaks suggest that Lukashenko himself is walking a dangerous tightrope. On one hand, he depends heavily on Russia politically, economically, and even militarily. Without Putin's support, his regime might collapse. But on the other hand, he knows that aligning too closely with Moscow could drag Belarus into total chaos. Western sanctions have already crippled the Belarusian economy, and public trust in the government is at an all-time low. According to several insiders, Lukashenko has privately expressed frustration with Putin's war, calling it a dead end that threatens Belarus's own sovereignty. The breaking point seems to have come after a series of Russian military setbacks and Putin's increasing pressure on Minsk to commit troops. Moscow reportedly demanded that Belarus open a new northern front to stretch Ukrainian defenses thin. But this time, Lukashenko said no. He refused to send Belarusian forces into direct combat, claiming it would endanger the nation. That single act of defiance has been interpreted in Moscow as a betrayal. Russian state media has begun to tone down its praise of Lukashenko, and there are even hints that the Kremlin might be considering a leadership change in Minsk. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials have cautiously welcomed Belarus's new stance. President Zelensky's advisors say that any split between Minsk and Moscow is a positive development for regional stability. There are even rumors that Belarusian representatives have held secret talks with Western diplomats about reducing dependence on Russia and opening potential trade routes with Europe. While nothing official has been confirmed, the very idea that Belarus might pivot westward is enough to terrify Putin and his inner circle. Inside Belarus, the situation is growing increasingly unstable. Reports from independent media outlets indicate that portions of the Belarusian military are refusing to cooperate with Russian officers. In some bases near the Ukrainian border, Russian advisors have reportedly been asked to leave. There are also whispers of sabotage train derailments, communication breakdowns, and intelligence leaks, all pointing toward growing anti-Russian sentiment within the Belarusian establishment. For years, Lukashenko managed to control his country with an iron fist, but now, even his own institutions seem to be slipping out of his hands. Internationally, this shift could have massive implications. If Belarus truly distances itself from Russia, it would cut off one of Moscow's last reliable allies in Europe. It would also disrupt Russia's supply lines and logistical support that run through Belarusian territory. In a broader sense, it would signal to other authoritarian regimes in the post-Soviet space that Putin's influence is waning. Countries like Kazakhstan, Armenia, and even Azerbaijan are already reevaluating their relationships with Moscow, sensing weakness and opportunity. Belarus could become the tipping point that accelerates this regional transformation. For the West, this development presents both opportunity and risk. On one hand, a Belarusian pivot away from Russia could strengthen Europe's strategic position and isolate Moscow further. On the other hand, it could provoke a desperate reaction from Putin, who may see Belarus's defection as an existential threat. Analysts warn that the Kremlin could respond with covert operations, cyber attacks, or even attempts to destabilize Belarus internally. After all, Putin cannot afford to lose another ally, especially one that shares such a long and strategically vital border with both Russia and Ukraine. The coming weeks will be critical. Belarus's internal politics are volatile, and Lukashenko's health has reportedly been declining. If his grip on power weakens, we might witness a historic shift, perhaps even a new government that openly rejects Russian domination. Several opposition leaders, including those in exile, have already begun positioning themselves for a post-Lukashenko era. They promise to restore democratic freedoms, rebuild relations with Europe, and completely cut ties with the Kremlin. At the same time, Russia is not sitting idle. Reports suggest that Russian special forces and intelligence agents are already operating in Belarus under the guise of joint exercises. Their mission is to ensure that Minsk stays loyal. But if public anger continues to rise, even these measures may not be enough. The Belarusian people have tasted defiance before during the massive protests of 2020, and many still remember how close they came to toppling Lukashenko back then. Now, with Russia weakened and distracted by the war in Ukraine, they may see their second chance. If Belarus truly turns against Russia, it could change the entire course of the Ukraine war. It would force Putin to divert troops and resources northward, stretch his already strained military logistics, and leave Russian forces in Ukraine even more vulnerable. It would also boost Ukrainian morale and potentially open the door for new Western support. In the long term, it could mark the beginning of the end for Putin's vision of a restored Soviet sphere of influence. So, what happens next? That depends on whether Lukashenko can continue balancing between loyalty to Moscow and pressure from his own people. History shows that such balancing acts rarely last. Once a regime begins to lose control, events can move fast, far faster than anyone expects. We may be witnessing the early stages of a geopolitical earthquake, one that will ripple across Europe for decades. For now, one thing is clear: the old alliances are breaking down, and the rules of the game are changing. Belarus's decision to distance itself from Russia could be the move that turns the tide of the Ukraine war and perhaps even signals the beginning of a new era for Eastern Europe, one where nations once trapped under Moscow's shadow finally begin to chart their own course. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. This situation is still unfolding, and we'll continue to follow every development closely. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more updates, and share your thoughts in the comments. The world is changing faster than anyone imagined, and Belarus may just be the country that changes everything.